Hi guys, it's this again. So this is the video for homework number 7, I believe, on Econ02 specifically. Slight little weird one. This is a bit of a weird video because I technically haven't done it yet, but I'm just going to go through how I would go about doing this homework, because the problem is, with this kind of homework, there's not too much stuff that I need to overly explain. With some pieces of homework, there's stuff that's always kind of weird, but with this, it's mostly just how to write it. Okay, so let me go through stuff. So we'll start on the first question here. Okay, we have Unit 16 question, and we want to ask what was the basis of U.S. technological leadership. Okay, so this is based on Chapter 16 primarily. Now you can pick after the Second World War, which is around the Golden Age sort of area, or you can pick from the mid-1990s, which is more about the Great Moderation in that zone. As you can see here, we're going to use concepts and models you've learned from the module, so I'd recommend having your book open, for example. Actually, I wonder if any of you guys have this, but I have the physical version. So I sort of like to just go into here and just look at stuff. So if I want to, like, oh yeah, I've got stuff like that. So that's helpful, but obviously you guys just use the online version. Yeah, so we need to make use of at least 3 concepts explaining their meaning. So the question specifically wants you to mention the concepts here, alright? Alright, so actually this is less related to Chapter 17 than it is to Chapter 16, although it is related to 17 in the time scale. It's more related to what happened over the 16 period. But yeah. You've also got the reading suggestions here. So on post-World War II, there's only really one suggestion. You've got this one here. So this is so this was published 1992, post-war era historical perspective. Nice stuff, right? Again, for all of these papers, how you go through them is rather simple. You do not have to read all of it, okay? Look, 38 pages, all right? No one's really going to ask you to read that much. Okay, of course you can, but it's not really going to be useful for you. All right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to read the introduction, okay, and we're going to read the conclusion. That is just whatever you do. If it doesn't have an introduction, it has an abstract, so go for that. So we have the introduction here. We're just going to skim over that. You can see, oh, okay, so the gross domestic product was rising post-war, so you can see that it took a dip and then rose, right? Yeah, the questions of how the post-war American lead came about and how it's eroded pose deeper questions in turn. So just the introduction would be fun, like this area, and then stop around long-standing American strengths or something like that. But normally, I just go to the conclusion because it gives you a lot more interesting stuff. So the conclusion is here. Let us recapitulate. We have argued that post-war American technological had 2 conceptually distinct components. There was, first of all, the long-standing strength in mass production. There was a second, a lead in high technology industries that was new and stemmed from investments in higher education. So just by reading that, I've got the general gist of the article. I don't need to go into detail. Okay, I can go into that. So what this seems to be, using this, is that, okay, well, we can essentially see that American post-war development in technological stuff came from already having a strength in industrialization and then having a higher investment in education and research and development than other countries had. So that's how we can sort of answer that question. So you can say that America had innovation red, you can say that they had little amount of competition, you can say that, yeah, again, research, development, education, this stuff is just mentioned. You can say how their production function moved upwards during that time, stuff like that, okay? On the second one, there's a lot more detail, okay? So we have, on the right here are the questions. So we have 4 sources here. We've got some from William D. Nordhaus from Yale University. We've got, here we've got a distinguished lecturer in government from M. Bailey. We've got a toolkit of policies to promote innovation. And we've got a working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research about this stuff. Again, I would just recommend skimming it. You do not need to do it. In fact, if you are feeling like you're in a rush, just go to the conclusion, because that will probably provide enough detail just by itself. Sorry if I'm speaking a bit softly today. I have a rough throat, I think. Yeah. This one has more general discussion here. So you can see that we've got just the general discussion that lasts for about 1.5 pages. So Norris concluded that shift effects were more important than within industry effects at explaining productivity slowdown then coming into view. But in the years that followed within industry effects, before 1973, productivity growth was recorded in both manufacturing and services sectors. But productivity growth came to a halt after that. Yeah, the mid-1990s has productivity growth in the services sector revived, but data problems cloud these observations. Again, this is the general discussion. I'm not going to read all of this because I want you guys to make your own conclusions, but yeah, we're going to go to conclusion in this one as well. Let's see. Yeah, this one's easy, right? Tiny conclusion. When running this sport, it seems to be too strong. After setting a better pace, the body fortunately seems to get a better second wind. The exhaustion recedes, the breathing... This is just more of a metaphor. That analogy seems appropriate for the US economy in recent years. The enthusiasm for information technology and for the shares of high technology went too far. Growth became unsustainably rapid and a corresponding slowdown inevitable. But the excessive optimism of the 1990s should not give way to excessive pessimism now. Many of the drivers of faster productivity growth in the 1990s, both those linked to information technology and those unrelated to it, remain in place. Useful stuff. Again, let's just quickly do this. I'm just going to try to be quick with this because I don't want to take up too much time. Yeah, market economies are likely to underprovide information primarily due to knowledge spillovers. This article discussed in evidence policy tools. Yeah, so this is policy suggestions. In the short run, research and development tax credits and direct public funding seem the most effective. Comparison research and development seems most effective. And we can see here, and the rise of software-based innovation led to the decline of Japan's IT industry and the resurrection of Silicon Valley. So this sort of indicates some level of inequality. Thankfully, this one has an abstract, which is normally much more valuable than the conclusion. So this paper documents a shift. We find strong evidence of a change in IT innovation that is systematic, substantial, and increasingly dependent on software. Yeah, and then they've got multiple things. Show that Japanese IT firms rely less on software advances than US IT innovation. The innovation and performance of Japanese IT firms is increasingly lagging behind, and that US IT firms are increasingly outperforming Japanese counterparts in more software-intensive sectors. Yeah. Provides suggestive explanation consistent with the hypothesis that human resource constraints played a role. There we go. So there's a human resource factor to it. Okay, that's the main part about it. All right. Also, if you're using mid-1990s, you may be useful to sort of look at these things. So we've got Unit 21 here, looking at 21.1 here, and the cost of innovation, stuff like that, as well as 21.2. Stuff like this would be very useful as well. Okay. Obviously, you guys can use chart. Obviously, clear suggestions here. Use your references. Okay, always include references. Even though they've given them to you, you need to include them. And you may want to include a chart. It's not necessary, but it will be good. So, that's that. So then we have the Unit 17 one. This is a less words, but still the same amount of marks. And this is asking us to answer the questions in exercise 17.4. Is that in this one? I'm just checking where the actual exercise is. It's probably in here, right? No, that's question 17.4. Where's the exercise 17.4? Is that after stagflation? Oh, it's further. Give me a moment here. There it is. Okay, so if you guys want to look at it in context, it's in 17.8 in that chapter. So we can see here, we need to show the information in figure 17.20, which is this one. So we need to show this information. Let's expand that. So this is our information we need to show. We need to show this information in the form of a balance sheet for one household from the lowest and one from the highest net worth. Okay. So assume that the sum of assets and liabilities is $200,000 for the poorer household and $600,000 for the richer household. Both households have some savings and their assets do not depreciate. Okay, so how do we start with this? Okay, so let's look at what we have generally in the house, the poorest household. Okay, the largest majority of the household's net worth plus debt is, well, the debt mostly. Debt takes up about, I'm going to just call it here, maybe say it's around 77%. Debt takes up 77%. Okay. Now debt, specifically loans, is a weird thing because loans are both assets and liabilities. If you guys should remember that from before, if you take out a loan of $100, it gives you an asset of $100 and a liability of $100. Okay, so debt in this case acts as a liability and a asset here. So we're going to put that in both sections of our columns. Okay, home equity is purely an asset. Okay, it's purely an asset. Whereas home equity by itself is just, well, equity does not include debt in this case. So I'm assuming it's just the asset, and then the financial wealth again. Financial wealth is unrelated to either of these. It's just the wealth that the household has. So again, that's just an asset. And of course, you would generally typify these as percentages, right? So, yeah. How about maybe I can draw on this screen? No, can I? No, I'm not. I haven't opened to screen annotation software. Never mind. It also wants us to think about the proportions of debts held by these households that might consist of mortgage debt. Now consider the relative effects on the households of a fall in housing prices. Now, we would assume that a poorest household would have a large majority of its debts be household debt. Because we would say that generally poorer households do not have enough financial wealth to afford a house straight up. So we would assume that the majority of their house is financed through debt. Yeah. So we would also say, well, obviously a poorer household would have a difficult time if there was a fall in housing prices, because that would essentially bring down their home equity, and but it would keep their debt essentially the same, because debt doesn't change dependent on prices in the housing market. So what it would do is it would bring down their net worth massively, to the point where they could not afford to pay back a mortgage, or the house price fell below the value of the mortgage. So, for example, imagine if you would, the home equity is this blue bar, and then there's a similar size section of the red bar. If the blue bar declines significantly enough, then the debt from the mortgage overwhelms the home equity, so it's impossible to pay it back, is the problem. So that's where households struggle. Whereas in the rich side, okay, you can see that the richest households most likely do not have either financed their home through debt in very small amounts, as you can see that the debts section of their bar is very small, or they've purely financed it through financial wealth. It could be either. So this is what's most likely as well. That's what's happened. All right. Define negative equity as a situation where the market value of a house is less than the debt secured on it. Yeah, that's what we sort of talked about. In your example balance sheet for the poorer family, calculate the fall in housing prices that would push the household into negative equity. So, if we had a net worth here, let's say that this net worth was about 20% out of this. So 20% of 200,000 is 40 grand. So that's the home equity, let's say. Okay. Now, if we had debt that would essentially, yeah. So the thing is, it's weird because it's not actually defined. Hold on. Yeah. Do you need to construct a balance sheet first of all? I see the problem is I'm doing this without a balance sheet, so I'm just sort of hypothesizing here. You guys can do whatever you want. You probably have more of a balance sheet than I do, but I'm just explaining the logic behind this. So, if we, for example, to say that the home equity was 40 grand, we would require a debt higher than 40 grand to sort of balance it, almost. Yeah, it would, no, not balance it, that would put the household into negative equity. So we would assume that housing prices, let's assume that the debt stays the same and the housing prices change instead. If we have debt that is, for example, just that high, it's a massive amount of debt. See, the thing is, it would imply that we would already be overwhelmed by home equity. Hold on. I may be misinterpreting some of this, maybe. Perhaps this is right. Let me have a think about this. I'll be back in a bit. Okay, I've got it. Alright, sorry, a little bit of a haze there. Okay, so think about home equity as sort of like home value minus debt, if that sort of makes sense. So the debt for example, here is 77%. But the entire value of the home would be the debt plus the home equity. So in this case, if we're assuming that this is 77% and this is 20%, then about 97% is taken up by the house value, is the main thing. So we're going to say that home equity is just what's left over. So the home value, in more of a sense, is 97% of the total there. Hold on, let me just check what that is. So, if 20, so it's 97 times, no, not 97, just 0.97 times 200,000. So the home value is about 194 grand, which makes sense, right? Like that's, well, I mean, that's not like a realistic value of a home anywhere. That's like the value of like a fucking 1-bedroom apartment in London. Wow, what value. And the debt, correspondingly, we also said that the debt was about 77%, so we're going to say that it's like 200,000. So that's the value of the debt. So we would have to say, from how much would we need to decrease to get from 194 to 154 in that value? So a housing price increase to get to that point. And that would have to be... I'm trying to think. Hold on. 194, 000 minus 154, 000. Means you have to decrease that by 40 grand over the entire price, which is going to be just 1594000. Yeah, 40. Yeah, it's like a 20.6% decrease in housing prices, which I think is what is correct here, right? I think so. Yeah? Yeah. Right? I think so, yeah. I don't know, you guys can take it as you can. I'm not entirely... Again, the purpose of these is, like, just to tell you guys my perspective on this. Like, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. But hopefully I can, like, throw out my ideas and some will stick. Yeah, so for the poorer family, calculate it. If the prices fell by just enough to push the household into negative equity, would this household be insolvent? So, negative equity, insolvency. Insolvency is when you cannot pay off your debts. So if this price fell by just enough to push it into negative equity, would the household be insolvent? I wouldn't say so, because they'd still have their financial wealth to sort of push back the debts a little, so they can pay off their debts with their financial wealth, not just their home equity. And then it would be back to sort of regular positive equity. Because it says fall by just enough. But we still have that financial wealth to carry us, right? We still have a little bit more. So, for example, if I took on, like, a household debt, and the value of my, like, I had let's be realistic in London, it's like a 1.2 million thing. If I had, like, debt of 1.2 million, and my house is worth 1.2 million, and if my house starts to decrease, so it's like 1.19 million, okay? So, for example, I would have still, like, what is that? Like, 10 grand to pay, yeah? So if I had like 10 grand in my savings account, or 10 grand like just from my job, I could pay off that part of the debt, and then I can then reduce the debt down so that it matches the level of house prices that I currently have. That's the thing. So that's what we would do in that case. We would finance it from financial wealth, not just house equity. Okay, I think that's all. Of course, if you guys have any other problems, feel free to call me, text me, do whatever. Also, if you guys would like, I can do actually I think I might do that just after this, but I'm going to do like a statter thing for people who just don't know how to use it properly, but hopefully that'll be useful. Okay, off I go now to do something. Yeah, hope you guys have a nice day, and yeah, I'll see you later. Bye.